Softness. Today I want to talk about DIY and how DIY relates to alternative spaces. Alternative culture is honestly just incredibly fascinating to me. In a lot of ways, it skillfully subverts mainstream culture, and for me that's American culture. But then in a lot of ways, alternative culture mirrors mainstream culture in ways that we probably wouldn't like to admit. If you spend any time in the sustainability community, you will hear that things like sustainable fashion and sustainable design are all very samey. There's definitely a very minimalist look associated with sustainable fashion. But what also interests me is the sheer number of people in the alternative fashion community that are turning to sustainability right now. Especially now that thrifting is so mainstream. I mean, it's never been easier to get your hands on secondhand clothing. It only makes sense that alternative fashion lovers would turn to DIY in order to interact with fashion in a more sustainable way. But DIY has existed in alt spaces forever. It's always been there. In fact, without DIY, many alternative spaces and many alternative fashions wouldn't exist. Before punk was in stores, it was DIY. Before goth was in stores, it was DIY. So many styles, musical genres, indie press communities came to be because a small group of people got together and decided to do something new. Before Harajuku was a tourist trap, it was a meeting place for a lot of crafty teenagers with lots of imagination and lots of free time. But now in 2020, you can get goth clothing online shipped to your front door for not that much money. And a sad byproduct of that is now that a lot of alt fashion is in the stores, a lot of people who are just now getting into it see it as this big, elitist, almost even consumerist thing. In 2020, people think that goth is expensive and that EGL is a collection hobby. At this point, Angelic Pretty could collab with Supreme and I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe it's just a symptom of consumerism. I mean, now that we have more sustainable fashion brands, I do see a lot less general DIY in the sustainability community. I mean, I remember when sustainability was about not buying things, and now it's about buying very specific things. But it used to be that there were no outwardly sustainable fashion brands. Brands didn't used to market their clothing in order to entice the ecological crowd. The only accessible options back then were buying secondhand or just learning how to make your own. And perhaps the same thing has happened in the alternative fashion community. The more popular certain styles and communities become, the more opportunity they have to be consumerized. I've discussed this before in some other videos, but before something becomes trendy, it has to already be a trend. Before the idea of goth was common and Hot Topic existed, then little baby bats had to cut up their own t-shirts that they bought from Goodwill. But those baby bats still existed. I mean, goths were there, but there was no Kill Star in the 80s. There was no Dolls Kill in the 70s when punk was taking off. You had to stud your own jacket or save up a lot of money and fly to visit a Vivienne Westwood store. But now that brands like Dolls Kill exist, there is no need to make your own pieces if you want to interact with alternative fashion. You can just go and buy it. In 1991, if you saw a picture of a club kid in the newspaper, you had to go to Joann's or Hobby Lobby in order to emulate it. Now you see a cool outfit on Insta and every single piece is tagged with a brand and you can just go and buy the thing. But what's an extra interesting aspect of all of this is that now we've invented the idea of posers. You listen to the music, you wear the clothes, but you're not a real punk unless insert reason here. You're not a real goth if you buy from Killstar or get sponsored from Killstar. That's what posers wear. Obviously, I personally don't believe that. You're valid no matter what you wear, but that is a prevalent idea in the community now. It is apparent that I am a DIY girl. I've always been a DIY girl at heart, and I'm always gonna be a DIY girl at heart. I believe that DIY is the true backbone of alternative culture. Of course, you can supplement with pre-existing brands. Not everyone is capable of creating their own beautiful wardrobe from scratch. But I think there's a balance that should be respected, especially when so many of the alternative styles that we love today were born from very anti-consumerist roots that would not really have supported a company like Dolls Kill in 2020. I think accessibility is also an important issue to consider in all of this. A lot of people can't afford brands like Killstar and have to make their own clothing because Killstar isn't an option for them. Dolls Kill isn't an option for them because $80 is still a lot of money to spend on a pair of shoes, even if you are somebody who wears sustainable fashion. And I don't think that DIY should ever be looked down upon. Now that there are all of these expensive brands and there is this elitism, it's almost like in certain circles, DIY and handmade clothing is looked down on, and that's really sad considering where we all came from. I know in the greater mainstream fashion world, there's a lot more elitism and handmade clothing is even more looked down on, and I think alternative fashion is really a place where DIY can be embraced to the fullest and people can push their imaginations and creativity to the fullest, especially if you're not somebody who can afford couture materials, if you're not somebody who works for a big major brand. In the mainstream world, there are only so many options to be creative with fashion. And also another thing I want to point out before I wrap up this video is that especially if you come from a marginalized background of any sort, there's usually little pressure to maintain the status quo because you can't do it anyway. You know, I came from a very not wealthy background, and I just didn't feel the urge to buy things from Aeropostale like the rest of my peers because I couldn't have afforded it if I wanted to. And I was friggin' weird in high school. I wore some weird stuff because I found that once I started getting creative, it was hard to stop. Like, I genuinely don't think I'll ever be able to dress like a normal person just because honestly, I never have. As someone who has been in alternative fashion circles and lots of different alternative fashion circles, I've definitely seen that there are some sections of alternative fashion that are very deeply racist, but that's not for this video. We've got all kinds of other things going on in the world right now. I want to keep my videos as happy as possible for now. But I've also seen in other circles, there are a lot of people of color in alternative fashion, like a lot. And I see so many more like people of all kinds of different backgrounds in alternative fashion, whereas in mainstream fashion, it's really just like thin, white, wealthy people that are represented. It's not really the huge, diverse rainbow of people that exist out there that are very visible in alternative fashion, and I think that that's another really great thing that the DIY culture of alternative fashion has provided for people. It gives all of these different people from all of these different backgrounds a creative outlet and it takes away that pressure to conform to that very, you know, Eurocentric beauty ideal that exists in the mainstream fashion world. And like I said, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that once you're already living outside the mainstream, once you're already, you know, queer or a person of color or any of those things, like there is obviously pressure to change yourself and conform, but at a certain point you just kind of have to accept yourself for who you are, and once you reach that stage, it's kind of hard to push yourself into the box. So once you already start doing one non-mainstream thing, the idea of doing other non-mainstream things just comes naturally, which is why I think you do see so many more non-normal people in alternative spaces. And I think that's another reason why DIY is so embraced, is because a lot of the people who do participate in alternative fashion aren't able to participate in mainstream fashion for for one reason or another. But that's all I really have to say in this video. I know there wasn't really a point to this one, but I really wanted to talk about DIY and how important it is, and honestly, I can't stress enough how game-changing it is to be able to just make your own things. I'm rambling at this point. I haven't left my house in a very long time, and I'm starting to go a little bit crazy. But yeah, basically, I see a lot of people talk about consumerism in alternative fashion, and I see a lot of people talk about brand identity in alternative fashion, but I feel like we should be talking more about the DIY aspect because it is so intrinsic to what alternative fashion is and how it came to be. And that is all I have to say in today's video. I just really wanted this to be more of amusing, and I would like people to chat with me about this in the comments. I want to know what your guys' opinions of DIY and how it relates to alternative fashion and how maybe it's affected your life and your experiences with alternative fashion and maybe even your experiences with consumerism and alternative fashion. I just want to get a conversation started. That's all this video is. I hope everybody has a good day, and I will see you all next time. Bye!